My stepmother openly told me, "You're not my family," after I was left without a Christmas present while her daughter got everything she wanted. Now I'm planning a revenge that will hit them where it hurts the most, their money. I'm 20 years old, and usually, things like this don't bother me. Gifts, all that Christmas fuss, that's for kids. But this year, everything went wrong. It was the end of November, and I had just arrived home from college for the break. I study far away, so I don't see my dad, and now his new wife, Julie, very often. Julie has a 16-year-old daughter, Emma, who, of course, lives with them. I guess I should be used to the idea that my house isn't completely mine anymore. Dad married Julie 3 years ago, a year after my mom died. It's always been tough, but I tried not to dwell on it. I knew Dad had the right to be happy, and Julie, well, she's Julie. Polite, sometimes overly sweet, but always with that cold, distant smile. Like she's assessing you, but she's already decided you won't pass inspection. Everything started the first Saturday after I arrived. Dad and Julie were in the kitchen, discussing the budget. We've never had money problems. Dad is a good lawyer and earns a very decent income. But here he was, talking about unexpected expenses, the market crisis, and how it's important to be sensible right now. I was just walking by to get some water, but I stopped when I heard my name. "And that's why, Rachel," Dad said, his voice quiet, but somehow too apologetic, "we've decided that this year we're going to cut back on spending. You understand, right?" I felt something clench inside. I walked into the doorway to let them know I was there. "Cut back on what?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Well, you're an adult now, 20 years old," Julie immediately chimed in. She was sitting there, stirring the coffee in her favorite oversized mug. "In college, independent. Christmas gifts are mostly for children. Emma is still a teenager, of course, she needs that magic. But you, darling, you should focus on your studies. We're paying for your tuition. That is our main gift." I stared at Dad. He avoided my gaze, looking down at his phone. "So, Emma gets gifts, and I don't?" I couldn't believe they were saying this so openly. It sounded like a punishment, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. "Rachel, don't be dramatic," Dad's voice became sharper, as it always did when he was uncomfortable. "It's not a punishment. It's just being rational. Julie and I discussed it. And then I saw the package. It was lying on the kitchen counter, partially opened on one side. Something was glittering inside. Julie quickly covered it with a magazine, but I managed to catch a glimpse. It was a thin, silver necklace. I'd seen the exact one advertised at the jewelry store in the mall. It was expensive. Very expensive. And on the tag that hadn't been fully removed, it read, "Julie from Jim." I looked at Julie. She was smiling, but there was nothing in her eyes but a cold, triumphant gleam. "And what is that?" I nodded towards the package. Dad quickly grabbed the magazine and picked up the package. That's just something I had to buy. You understand?" I understood everything. The economizing only applied to me. My adult, independent status turned out to be the perfect excuse to simply cut me out of the holiday, out of the budget, and essentially out of their life. I wanted to say something sharp, but Julie beat me to it. She stood up, walked over to me, and placed her hand on my shoulder. Her hand was cold and clammy. "Listen to me, Rachel. You are Jim's daughter. And I respect you. But Emma is my daughter, and she is part of our family. And you. You are not my family anymore. Your interests are your own. We provide for you, but we are not obligated to spoil you. Just accept it." Those words stabbed me. You're not my family. It wasn't about the gifts. It was about everything. About my place in this house. About the fact that I was a stranger, a temporary guest they tolerated. Dad stayed silent. He just watched us, not intervening. He allowed her to say that. And in that moment, something broke inside. Not a tear, not a tantrum, but a cold, heavy feeling that replaced any hurt. I removed her hand from my shoulder. I looked her straight in the eyes and smiled. It wasn't my usual smile. It was the smile of someone who had just understood how the world truly works. "Fine, Julie," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "I understand. I won't ask you for any gifts again." I left the kitchen and went up to my room. I locked the door and sat on my bed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I was calm. But my mind was racing. They decided I no longer deserved their attention, their time, their money. Fine. They chose the battlefield. And I'm going to show them what it means to be independent and adult. If they want to talk to me in the language of money and exclusion, so be it. I know something they both value highly. And it's not a silver necklace. I opened my laptop and started looking up information. 1 month. I have only 1 month until Christmas. And I'm going to make sure it's the most expensive Christmas of their lives. They said they needed to cut back on spending. Great. I'll help them cut back. I started with finding the documents that always lay in Dad's study. Names, dates, amounts. The first details of my plan were already coming together in my head. I won't forget those words, "You're not my family." And they won't forget that they were the ones who said them to me. The air in the house changed the moment I started my project. It was no longer the heavy, awkward silence of people pretending to be happy. It was a new kind of tension, the kind that simmers when someone is planning something, and the others, though oblivious, sense a shift in the gravity of the room. I kept my smile bland, almost apologetic, around Julie and Dad, which, oddly enough, made Julie relax. She saw my quietness as defeat. She thought she had won. Big mistake. The first week was all about reconnaissance. My old room is right next to Dad's home office. I know his routines, his password habits, the way he stacks papers. I've lived in this house for 19 years. Julie, for all her attempts to take over, doesn't know the house the way I do. She's too focused on surface perfection, the staged dinners, the curated Christmas decorations she started putting up immediately, trying to make the house theirs. I needed access to Dad's financial records, not just the random files I glimpsed. He's a smart lawyer, but predictable. I knew his main password was a variation of his old college sports team, mixed with the year he married Mom. Julie didn't know that. She knew the new ones, the ones related to her. But he still used the old code for the deepest financial folders. A man can change his wife, but not his college loyalty. It took 3 nights. I waited until 2 a.m. when their bedroom door was finally closed, and the only sound was the irritating, rhythmic hum of the forced air heating. I slipped into his office. Everything looked the same, expensive mahogany, leather chairs, and the smell of old paper and new money. I used a small light on my phone, setting the brightness to minimum. The password worked on the 3rd try. The rush of adrenaline wasn't about breaking the law, it was about the confirmation of what they were doing. They were playing house, and I was the ghost in the machine. What I found was more detailed than I expected. Dad had set up a complex series of trusts and investment accounts after my mother's death. The big one, the College and Future Security Trust, was explicitly designated for me. It was substantial, growing fast, and entirely separate from his current assets with Julie. But alongside that, I found records related to a property he bought 6 months ago. A condo in downtown Boston. He'd told me he was considering opening a satellite office there. A professional move. The documents said otherwise. The purchase was made entirely under a different LLC name, but the payments were tracked directly from his personal, joint account with Julie. The tenant lease agreement? It was signed by Emma's older cousin, a recent college grad named Liam, who was supposedly looking for work. The rent was half the market rate, paid directly to Dad. It was a favor, a way to move money around without drawing too much attention, but it was all completely legal, just extremely shady and hidden. The real eye-opener, the thing that solidified my resolve, was the comparison between Emma's upcoming 16th birthday party budget and my entire yearly allowance for books and travel. Emma's budget, planned for January, was listed at over $15,000. It detailed a catered event, a live DJ, and a surprise trip to the Bahamas, all hidden under business development costs. Meanwhile, my travel budget to come home for holidays was recently cut by 30% due to the crisis. The crisis that only affects me. I started spending more time with Emma. She's not inherently mean, just completely clueless and spoiled. I watched her interact with Julie, the constant stream of affirmations, the easy access to Dad's credit cards for small, everyday purchases. She asked me about college, clearly seeing me as a novelty, not a person. "I can't wait for my sweet 16, Emma chirped one afternoon while we were supposedly baking cookies, a forced bonding activity initiated by Julie. "Mom says Dad is going all out, but I'm not supposed to know about the Bahamas." "Don't tell." "Why would I tell?" I replied, pulling a tray of slightly burnt cookies from the oven. "Well, sometimes people get jealous," she said, looking straight at me, but with that vacant, childlike honesty. She wasn't being malicious, she was just stating what she assumed was a fact. Of course, I'd be jealous. "I'm more concerned about finals right now than island trips," I said flatly, giving her nothing to work with. But I was listening. I asked her casual questions about Liam, the cousin in Boston. She told me he was struggling, but Dad was really helping him out. She even showed me a text from Liam thanking Dad for the sweet deal on the rent. Bingo. The condo wasn't a secret office, it was a heavily discounted investment property masked as a favor to family, Julie's family, that is. The conflict wasn't just about the money now, it was about the systemic exclusion. They were funneling resources, favors, and attention exclusively to Julie's side while actively justifying my neglect with a financial lie. Dad's silence throughout all of this was the real betrayal. I needed to find the one thing that could expose the condo situation without making it look like I was spying. An external pressure point. Something that would bring the rationalized cutting of costs into direct conflict with the secret $15,000 birthday party and subsidized housing they were orchestrating. I realized I didn't need to break into the main college and future security trust. That was protected and would take years to touch. I needed to hit the money they were spending now, the funds that supported their immediate, fabricated luxury. I started searching public records, local tax assessors, building codes, and, most importantly, the new, stricter university guidelines on financial aid transparency. My plan began to solidify, based on something Dad would never expect: paperwork and bureaucratic compliance. It had to look like an accident, an innocent mistake that blew up their carefully constructed reality. 1 month to Christmas. The tension was building, and they hadn't even noticed the shadow I was casting. The atmosphere in the house was becoming unbearable, heavy and fake, like a holiday movie set right before the climactic disaster. We were already halfway through December. The house was aggressively decorated. Julie had hired a professional decorator, another expense tucked away under some vague, home improvement budget line. Every corner screamed forced cheer, a stark contrast to the silence between me and Dad. He continued to avoid any deep conversation, communicating in clipped, businesslike tones. My focus was strictly on my plan. It wasn't about the gifts anymore, the gifts were just the spark. This was about principle, about them looking me in the eye and lying, about Julie explicitly stating that I was surplus to their requirement, that I was not my family. I had gathered enough evidence now, the explicit records of the $15,000 party budget for Emma, the under-the-table lease agreement for Liam in the Boston condo, and the proof that Dad's alleged financial crisis was entirely fabricated to justify cutting me out. I had identified the pressure point, the university's financial aid integrity office. Because Dad is a high earner, my scholarship is need-based but heavily scrutinized. They require annual, certified documentation of all family assets and rental income, even if derived from trusts or non-primary residences. If Dad was receiving undeclared rental income from the Boston condo, even a subsidized one, it constituted unreported assets that could jeopardize my current aid package. It was a perfect, self-destructing mechanism. I didn't have to break the law, I just had to make sure the right documents, the true documents, reached the right place. The tension finally snapped a few days before Christmas. Julie and Emma returned from a massive shopping trip. They had armfuls of bags, designer names, expensive electronics. Emma, naturally, couldn't contain her excitement. She burst into the living room, where I was pretending to read, and dumped a gigantic red bag onto the sofa. "Look, Rachel. Mom said I needed a new snowboard for the trip in January. And this coat is from that really exclusive boutique downtown." She was practically glowing, tearing tissue paper to reveal a sleek, white parka that probably cost more than my textbooks for a semester. Julie followed her, holding a shimmering package wrapped in gold foil. She set it gently on the coffee table. "Isn't it beautiful, sweetie?" Julie cooed at Emma. "Your father really wants you to have the best Christmas ever." I closed my book slowly, placing it on my lap. I looked directly at Julie, bypassing Emma. "It looks great, Emma," I said, my voice completely flat. Then I turned my attention back to Julie. "I saw Dad bringing in some other packages, too. Did he get you that designer purse you were talking about?" Julie's smile froze, turning brittle. She hadn't expected me to acknowledge her. She wanted me to be invisible, accepting my designated role as the adult who doesn't participate. "He's been very generous, Rachel," she said, her tone suddenly clipped and defensive. She walked over to the tree, adjusting an ornament unnecessarily. "It's good to hear that a financial crisis hasn't hit everyone," I replied, leaning back, watching her every move. That was the trigger. She dropped the ornament she was holding. It didn't break, just bounced silently on the carpet. She turned, and the cold mask finally slipped. Her eyes narrowed, and the phony sweetness vanished, replaced by genuine, cutting malice. "Listen to me, you ungrateful girl," she hissed, keeping her voice low so Emma, who was busy admiring the snowboard, wouldn't hear the full force of it. "Your father works himself to the bone. He had to buy me something. We are partners. We are the foundation of this house. We are prioritizing our needs. Yours is already handled, your expensive education. You don't get both. You are too old for Santa Claus, and frankly, you're just a burden we carry." I didn't flinch. "So, Dad cuts my holiday travel budget by 30% because of a crisis, but somehow manages to find $15,000 for Emma's party and a brand new purse for you? And what about the silver necklace he bought you earlier this month, the one I saw him hiding?" I watched her face pale. She thought I hadn't seen it, that I had forgotten. "You have no right to snoop in our affairs," she whispered fiercely, stepping closer. "That necklace was a private matter. This is exactly why you are being excluded, Rachel. You look a gift horse in the mouth. You are demanding, and you lack appreciation. Emma understands family loyalty." "Loyalty? Or just a bigger allowance?" I challenged. "The only thing I'm demanding is honesty. You and Dad stood here and told me we had to cut back. You're spending money on a subsidized apartment for your nephew in Boston while I'm supposedly the one causing the financial strain." She stared at me, her mind racing, trying to figure out how I knew about Liam and the condo. The panic was evident in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm talking about transparency, Julie," I said, finally standing up. I was taller than her. "I'm talking about how you told me I was not your family as an excuse to exclude me from Christmas, but you're perfectly happy to take everything else. I'm talking about the fact that if you're going to be rational about money, then maybe you should be rational about all of it. Including the hidden rental income and the undeclared assets." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare cause trouble for your father. He provides for you. You will ruin everything." "He's providing for Emma and Liam first," I retorted, shaking her hand off. "And you are the one who drew the line, Julie. You told me I wasn't family. Fine. If I'm not family, then I have no obligation to protect your secrets. Especially when those secrets affect my ability to pay for my own education. You made this about money. Now, let's see who is better at playing that game. I walked out, leaving her standing there, her face a terrifying mixture of fury and fear. I went straight to my room, grabbed the envelope containing the anonymized tip and the photocopied records of the Boston condo rental agreement and Emma's party budget, and sealed it. It was addressed to the Financial Aid Integrity Office. The conflict was now unavoidable. I only had to drop the envelope in the mailbox. The bomb was primed. The silence after the confrontation with Julie was worse than the yelling. It was a calculating, heavy silence. She didn't try to talk to me again. She avoided me, watching me from across the room with narrowed eyes, like a snake calculating its next strike. She knew I knew too much about the condo, the hidden income, and the selective crisis. She just didn't know what I was going to do with that information, or that the package was already in the mail system. I dropped the envelope into the post box 2 days after our fight. It was strangely anticlimactic. No fireworks, just the gentle thud of the heavy paper hitting the bottom of the box. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction, immediately followed by a dull ache of worry. I had set off a chain reaction that would inevitably hurt my dad, even if he was the one who allowed the setup. He was complicit, but he was still my father. Was I going too far? Julie's words, "You will ruin everything," kept replaying in my head. The next few days felt like waiting for a slow-moving train crash. Christmas was 2 days away. Emma was oblivious, bouncing around the house, bragging about her new expensive gear. Dad was stressed. I could tell by the way he worked late in his office, the door closed, taking calls in hushed, anxious tones. He probably sensed that Julie was holding a loaded gun aimed at him, not realizing I was the one who pulled the trigger. Then, the twist. It happened late one afternoon. I was scrolling through old photos on my laptop when I heard Dad's office door slam open. He wasn't on the phone. He was talking to Julie, his voice loud, shaky, and bordering on panic. I immediately crept to the top of the stairs, crouching down to listen. "I told you not to use that account. I specifically told you that account was for my firm's operating expenses only," Dad yelled. "It was only $3,000, Jim. It was the only way to cover the deposit on the catering for Emma's party without flagging the main account." Julie shot back, her voice tight with anger, not fear. "We needed to secure the reservation. And it's not like it was a loan from the firm, it was a reimbursement for client expenses. It was an unauthorized transfer, Julie. They're already doing the annual audit, and they flagged it. They want a full reconciliation of that account by the 30th. They think I'm padding expenses." The firm's audit. Not the university's financial aid office. My plan hadn't even had time to take effect. Something else entirely was going wrong. Julie softened her tone immediately, realizing the gravity of this threat, not a scholarship, but his reputation and career. "Jim, honey, calm down. We can move the money back. Just borrow it from the college trust for a week, and then pay it back when we get the end-of-year bonus." I froze. The college trust. The fund that was explicitly set up for my future, protected after my mother's death. I can't just borrow from that, Julie. It's highly restricted. And it's not for personal debt. Besides, I can't touch it without an external trustee signing off. Dad stopped himself, lowering his voice, but I could still hear the frantic edge. "Unless I liquidate a small portion of the secondary investments tied to the account. That's allowed under emergency educational disbursement rules." Julie moved in for the kill. "See? Emergency disbursement. This is an emergency. We need to stop the firm from thinking you're stealing. Your reputation is everything. Just take out $30,000. Pay back the $3,000, and use the rest to smooth over the audit, pay a consultant, whatever. We can always put it back in January, maybe even with interest. There it was. The moral dilemma, the real betrayal. Dad was considering dipping into my secure, protected future money, the only financial thing I had that Julie hadn't managed to taint, to cover up a $3,000 mistake she made for her daughter's extravagant party. And he was going to disguise it as an emergency educational disbursement. The irony was a physical blow. They had cut me off from a measly Christmas gift, justifying it with a lie about financial hardship, and now they were about to steal from my future to protect his professional image, which Julie was jeopardizing. I sat there, paralyzed. I had already activated my plan to report the undeclared income, which would cause trouble with my financial aid, maybe even leading to an investigation. But if I did nothing now, Dad would liquidate a portion of my trust, an irreversible damage that would serve their immediate needs. I had to choose, expose the secret rental income and risk losing my scholarship/aid, my current resources, or confront him about the trust and risk losing my secured future, my long-term resources, while saving him from professional embarrassment. Both choices would destroy his carefully managed facade of stability. I crept back to my room. My hands were shaking. I pulled out the phone. I had to call someone. Not Dad. Not Julie. Someone who knew about the trust. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name, David Miller, the independent trustee appointed after Mom's death. He was obligated to protect my financial interests. I hesitated. If I called David, the secret about the trust would explode immediately, and Dad would be forced to explain why he suddenly needed an emergency disbursement. It would expose Julie's reckless spending and their financial maneuvering right before Christmas. It would be a catastrophic blow to their fabricated happiness. But it would stop him from touching the money. If I didn't call, the trust would be raided, and my own plan to report the rental income would likely expose the rest of their lies anyway, but only after the money was gone. I looked at the phone, at David's number. I took a deep breath. You are not my family. That voice, Julie's voice, was all the motivation I needed. If he's willing to sacrifice my future for her immediate comfort, then I have no obligation to protect him from the consequences of his actions. I pressed the call button. Hello? David? It's Rachel. I'm sorry to call so late, but I think my father is about to make a very big mistake regarding my college trust. The die was cast. Christmas was tomorrow. Christmas morning arrived, not with the smell of pine and cinnamon, but with the thick, cloying tension of things unsaid. Emma was ecstatic, ripping into mountains of gifts, a new laptop, the expensive snowboard, jewelry. Dad and Julie watched her, trying to maintain the facade of a perfect, wealthy family. I sat on the edge of the sofa, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, observing them. I had no stocking, no presents, just the chilling clarity of what I had done. The first explosion wasn't the sound of unwrapping, it was the sharp, insistent ring of Dad's private cell phone. He glanced at the caller ID, and his face instantly went pale, the kind of fear I had never seen on him before, not panic, but sheer, sinking dread. It was David Miller, the trustee. Dad stood up and walked into the hallway, trying to keep his voice low, but the walls in this house are old, and the tension made everything sound amplified. David, wait, this is not a good time. It's Christmas morning. What disbursement? What are you talking about? His voice was weak. I assure you, David, the situation is completely stable. I have not requested any emergency educational funds. Rachel must have misunderstood something. Julie had followed him, her eyes wide with mounting horror. She knew the name David Miller. She knew he was the only one who could stop them from touching the trust. She grabbed Dad's arm, hissing at him. Don't tell him that, Jim. Tell him we had a legitimate investment opportunity. Lie to him. I stood up, walked calmly into the hallway, and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. Dad looked at me, his eyes betraying a deep, sick realization. He knew I had made the call. He didn't have to say it. David, I cut into the conversation, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of Christmas cheer. He's trying to liquidate the funds to cover an unauthorized transfer his wife made from his firm's business accounts. It's not an educational emergency. It's a career emergency for him, caused by her. He was going to use my future as collateral. A stunned silence fell. Dad dropped the phone from his ear, staring at me as if I were a stranger. Julie launched herself at me. You venomous little liar. You ruined us. You don't know anything. You did this to your own father. She grabbed my sleeve, but Dad pulled her back, his face contorted in a silent scream. He put the phone back to his ear, his attempt to salvage his dignity failing spectacularly. It's true, David. I was considering it. But I didn't execute the transfer. I needed the liquidity for a brief period. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I will send you a full statement this afternoon confirming all funds are secure and untouched. He spoke quickly, desperately trying to sound in control. He hung up, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the phone. He looked at me, then at Julie, then back at me. Emma was now standing in the living room doorway, her face crumpled with confusion, holding a brand new designer handbag. The scene was perfectly, dramatically ugly. Rachel, Dad started, his voice a broken whisper. How could you? After everything I've done for you? This is my career. This is my life. You just put everything in jeopardy because of some petty jealousy over a gift? Petty jealousy? I laughed, a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. Is that what you call it, Dad? I was told I had to cut back because of a crisis. Meanwhile, you're spending thousands on a party that's hidden under business expenses and giving a discounted apartment to Julie's family. And when Julie screws up your firm's books, you decide that the best solution is to steal from the only secure thing my mother left me? That's not petty, Dad. That's a choice. You chose to protect your professional image and Julie's reckless spending over my entire future. Julie stepped forward, her face a mask of furious accusation. We told you the truth. You are not family. You're a liability. You always have been. You're just like your mother, a manipulative, cold witch. That was the line. The final, irreparable tear. I looked past Julie, straight at Dad. He didn't flinch. He just watched, exhausted and defeated, confirming every word she had said with his silence. He was letting her say it again. He was choosing her. David Miller already knows everything he needs to know, I said, my voice low and final. The trust is secured. And by the way, Dad, when the university's financial aid office gets my paperwork, they might ask a few questions about your undeclared rental income from that Boston condo, too. That should complicate your audit even more. You wanted transparency and rational spending. Now you have it. I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't need to see the shock on their faces, the realization that the anonymous tip was from the person they excluded. I walked past them, up the stairs. I grabbed my packed suitcase, I'd prepared it the night before, and my car keys. I didn't take anything else. I stopped at the front door. Dad was still standing in the hallway, Julie weeping noisily now, her extravagant Christmas a heap of ruined fabric and fear. I'm leaving, I stated. I'll be in the dorms early. Don't worry about my travel budget. I'll pay for the bus ticket myself. I looked at the perfectly decorated tree, the symbols of their fabricated life. They had taught me a harsh, simple lesson in the span of 1 month. Family isn't about blood or history, it's about mutual respect and honesty. When the money runs the show, and the lies are the script, there is no family, just business transactions and liabilities. I stepped out onto the snowy sidewalk. The cold air hit my face. I hadn't destroyed them, I had simply stopped protecting their lies. I had secured my financial future, but I had paid a heavy price, the final, crushing loss of my father. I got into my old car. I turned the key. I was 20 years old, completely alone, and financially secure. But as I drove away from the house, I realized the biggest conflict wasn't money or gifts. It was figuring out how to build a life when the only thing left of your foundation is the cold, hard realization that you had to burn the house down to escape the fire. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing: I was finally, truly, my own family.